How do we take a complex scene and work out how to draw it directly in ink? What decisions do we have to make? And where do we start? How do we start? And how do we progress a drawing in ink when there is no pencil, when we can't erase any mistakes? How do we start? How do we keep going? This video steps through my processes in doing this with tips and techniques that I've worked out along the way and demonstrate to you. Here's the Paris street scene I'm planning to draw. And here we have the extreme left side of the front facade of the Pantheon. I find this block of buildings in the center here with the facade curving away from us interesting. I like the shadows that we get on these sides of the buildings. I like the sense of the bulk of the Pantheon closer. What I don't particularly like is the awkwardness of these figures here. I feel it perhaps stretches a bit much and we tend to get lost over here. I cropped the picture this far to the left because I wanted this lamppost to connect with these lampposts. But I do feel that things get a bit lost over here and with this big gap between these two groups of people. One freedom I have is to adjust the composition to make a better drawing. So I've cropped my original photo to this scene. I've reduced it slightly at the top, very slightly on the right hand side, and to a greater degree on the left hand side. What I've decided to do is to put the lamppost that I've cropped out in the picture and move this lamppost very slightly to the right and then put the one that I've cropped out here, being careful to keep the perspective correct. The figures that I've cropped out here, I'm going to move them to here, but also bring them closer to me to give some foreground interest. I'm going to align their proportions with this figure, but about here. This couple here, I'm going to slide across to about here to create some more foreground focal point, but not to detract from this architectural grouping as the central element of the drawing. So I'm going to use this photo as my reference photo, but keep this one close to hand to get these figures and this lamppost. Because there is a significant depth in this scene from this foreground space to these houses in the distance, the other consideration is how I want to plot creating the effect of depth. I'm thinking I'm going to make my foreground this building here, this front corner of the Pantheon, this rail, all the figures in front of it, and these two lampposts and the one I'm going to move to here. My midground will be this central grouping of buildings and my distance will be these buildings behind this tree. I will use thinner lined pens as our distance moves backwards. All that's left to do now is to draw. So let's start. Starting with a 0.3mm Copic multiliner fine liner. I'm going to start with this building and I'll take a little more time and effort to make it as accurate as I can because I will then use this building as a reference point as I progress across the drawing and down the drawing. I start by drawing this section not because it's part of the closest section to the front, but because I think it's going to be the simplest part to draw accurately. It's always hardest at the start of a drawing where we have no reference points and where if we don't draw something exactly looking right, it just looks so wrong that it can be discouraging and make us want to keep starting again. So I try and make starting my drawings easiest by starting with a simple part. It also helps me to draw it more in proportion. That's important because what I draw first ends up becoming a bit like a ruler, which I use to measure other parts of the drawing that I go on to draw. So I'm working out these arches, these windows. One of the decisions we have to make is when we have multi-paned large windows is to work out how small we're going to draw the individual panes. I'm tempted to simplify it, but in the end I decided to give it a go and to draw them quite small. And then it's really filling the decorative work in on this facade. Again, with the detail of decorative work, it's important to suggest the difference rather than the exactness of it all. While I haven't drawn the bottom section of this building, I'm going to wait until I can run the rail right the way across my drawing. So now I'm going to consider the midground buildings adjacent to this closest building. And I'm going to switch from my 0.3 to my 0.2 fine liner. Having established these proportions, I'm now going to reference off them. To help these windows look as though they sit further back in our plane, not just am I drawing them with a lighter pen, but I'm drawing them with a lighter touch. I'm drawing less detail with a looser style. Now, in filling in the shadows behind the window panes in this section, again, I use a lighter touch, a looser touch. Continuing to reference what I've already drawn, I move along with this centre building, paying particular attention to get the foreshortening correct. I know that for me, the biggest potential problem will be that I widen this section too much. I need to keep it nice and tight as it foreshortens away from me so that I fit everything onto the page. And I continue to use my 0.2mm pen for this central midfield area. Again, I started getting the top and bottom perspective lines in place for this section. The important thing to get right in this next section is the alignment of these windows. I need to align them horizontally on the perspective lines, and I need to align them vertically under each other. It's really important to pay attention to this. These windows face the sun and have blinds behind them, so most of them don't have that dark shadow that the side street windows have. And now we move across to the final building in our midsection, which angles away from us at a greater angle than this building, so the foreshortening increases. So it's again very important that we keep it nice and tight and we don't stretch the building out as we draw it. And again, I will reference off what I've already drawn to just help keep the proportions and locations correct. Once we start drawing a facade which is as distant as this one is, and where the foreshortening is so extreme, it's important not to try and draw windows. They'll just take up too much space. We're really drawing the effect of the windows, largely the shadows. The more prominent thing we need to get right is the perspective lines, because they continue to be very visually prominent. As I draw the roof and the dormer windows, it's important to notice how the detail often steps back in terms of alignment with what's underneath. So I make sure that I capture that sense, and then the other important thing is that these perspective lines off to the left need to slope slightly more and more as they rise above eye level. So I pay attention to that as well. I use the 0.3mm pen to do these 3 lampposts because they're closer than the buildings behind them. I use my 0.3mm pen to now draw in the 2 figures that I've moved across from the left and also brought a bit closer to the front. So I get them in place, and then I add the second group that I've also moved across to the right a bit, and I work the rail in behind. The rail is the sort of detail that can feel like it takes as long as the rest of the drawing, but it's still important to give it our attention. Then once I've done the rail, I've got the parts of the building behind the rail, which I always do after the rail. Then I just work on more of the details with the placards on the rail, and I get the Pantheon drawn in, and then I switch to my 0.1mm pen to do the buildings that are in the furthest distance. Again, I use a very light touch for these. I'm just suggesting the detail. Hi, I'm Stephen Travers. If that were helpful, could I ask you to help me? And if you haven't already subscribed, to subscribe to my channel, hit notifications, leave a comment, tell me why it was helpful, or if I misgiven you some information you'd like, tell me what that is. That would just help me as I continue to learn to create videos and grow my YouTube channel. But of course, I hope my explaining my process when I look at a scene and work out what I'll draw and how I'll draw it, and then I progress that drawing through, was helpful for you. It's really pulling together all the different skills that a lot of my videos talk about in individual sections. I deliberately haven't put tone into this drawing because I thought that was worth a separate video on its own. So if you're interested in that, then just keep looking to see what videos come up, because it won't be too far along the track. Personally, I'm looking forward to seeing how this drawing turns out when it's completely finished, because this is a scene I've actually wanted to draw for a long time. The important thing is as we draw, we have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.